Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jim, and we're going to continue on our Frederick Douglass deep dive. This is narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. I'm using my annotations from my Dover Thrift Edition, and we are up to chapter 10, the longest chapter in the book, so I don't want to waste time. We're going to jump right into this. We'll try to move quickly and show you some of the more important passages and do some summary of what else is going on in this chapter. It's a real turning point in the whole narrative. So let's turn right to it. Okay, so Frederick Douglass has been hired out to Mr. Covey, a slaveholder, but a lower class slaveholder. And it's January 1833. So he's been sort of rented out. And the idea here is Mr. Covey's also going to break this slave because that's what he's good at doing. And Frederick Douglass is going to be a field hand, his first time working in the fields all the time. And he lives with Mr. Covey for 1 year, and it splits into 6-month chapters, if you will. So the first 6 months are awful, and the final 6 months go a lot better for him. But things don't start very well. Frederick gets whipped very severely. He was given the responsibility of driving some oxen, and he loses control of the ox. And the ox cart spills and breaks into a fence and causes damage, and Frederick gets severely whipped. And then there's an interesting, Frederick Douglass is constantly whipped here. He says during the first 6 months of that year, scarce a week passed without his whipping me. So 6 months, 4 weeks, a month, like so we're talking about 24 whippings at a minimum. And, it was just endless. Mr. Covey did feed the slaves pretty well, but they never had time to eat. They were sort of rushed along. And the character profile of Mr. Covey is what comes next. So I want to get into this a little more deeply, and we'll talk about a theme here that's important because it helps you understand a little bit more about how the slave system worked, and that is the power of deception. Okay, so Mr. Covey, Douglass tells us, was one of the few slaveholders who could and did work with his hands. So he actually worked along with the slaves, a hard worker, but he was always around or potentially around. There was no deceiving him. But he was deceiving. His work went on in his absence almost as well as in his presence. He had the faculty of making us feel that he was ever present. This he did by surprising us. He was sneaky, cunning. They called him the snake. He would slither around and then pop up unbeknownst to them, catching them being lazy or taking a break or something. So they got accustomed to his constant presence. And this brings up the theme of surveillance. Constant surveillance. Okay. On page 37 in my copy, Mr. Covey, his forte consisted in his power to deceive. His life was devoted to planning and perpetuating the grossest deceptions. Everything he possessed in the shape of learning or religion he made conform to his disposition to deceive. He seemed to be very devotional. Once again, one of these good Christians. He would read his hymn and nod at me to commence. I would at all times do so, at others I would not. My non-compliance would almost always produce much confusion. To show himself independent of me, he would start and stagger through with his hymn in the most discordant manner. He says, I do verily believe that he sometimes deceived himself into the solemn belief that he was a sincere worshiper of the Most High God, and this too at a time when he may be said to have been guilty of compelling his woman slave to commit the sin of adultery. Okay, so that's an interesting twist on the deception theme. So not only do the slave holders deceive the slaves, but they're deceiving themselves, thinking they're better Christians than they really are, for example, thinking they're more moral than they really are. We're getting now to rock bottom in Frederick Douglass's narrative. So he's on the point of being broken. You could say that he actually was broken. But what happens after that is very telling. He says, if at any one time of my life more than another I was made to drink the bitterest dregs of slavery, that time was during the first 6 months with Mr. Covey. They always worked. He reaches the breaking point here. I was broken in body, soul, and spirit. My natural elasticity was crushed. My intellect languished. The disposition to read departed. The cheerful spark that lingered about my eye died. The dark night of slavery closed in upon me, and behold, a man transformed into a brute. Just what the slave breaker wants. We don't want you to be human. We don't want you to read. We don't want you to think. We just want you to work and obey like a brute. That's not the end of the story. He's even tempted to commit suicide and murder of Mr. Covey, but he was prevented by a combination of hope and fear. And then this is an important passage worth reading too. There's a little bit of a soliloquy now as Frederick Douglass watches the ships like going up the Chesapeake Bay. So we'll spend a little time with this passage, which seems to give him hope in the midst of despair. So as he's watching these beautiful vessels robed in purest white sailing, it torments him. He says, I have often stood all alone upon the lofty banks and traced with saddened heart and tearful eye the countless number of sails moving off to the mighty ocean. And here's the soliloquy. You are loosed from your mooring. He's addressing the ships. You are loosed from your moorings and are free. I am fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's sweet, swift-winged angels that fly around the world. I am confined in bands of iron. So these oppositions. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on one of your gallant decks and under your protecting wing. Alas, because betwixt me and you the turbid waters roll. Go on, oh, that I could go also go. Could I but swim, if I could fly, oh, why was I born a man, of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance. I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. And here he appeals to God. Oh God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free. Is there any God? Questions God here. Why am I a slave? I will run away. I will not stand it. Get caught or get clear, I'll try it. I had as well die with ague as the fever. I have only one life to lose. I had as well be killed running as die standing. So he's determined to try to run away in the midst of this despair. Only think of it, 100 miles straight north and I am free. Try it, yes. God helping me, I will. It cannot be said that I shall live and die a slave. I will take to the water. This very bay shall yet bear me into freedom. The steamboats steered in a northeast course from North Point. I will do the same, and when I get to the head of the bay, I will turn my canoe adrift and walk straight through Delaware into Pennsylvania. When I get there, I shall not be required to have a pass. I can travel without being disturbed. Let but the first opportunity offer, and come what will, I am off. Meanwhile, I will try to bear up under the yoke. I am not the only slave in the world. Why should I fret? I can bear as much as any of them. Besides, I am but a boy, and all boys are bound to someone. It may be that my misery and slavery will only increase my happiness when I get free. There is a better day coming. And this is his hope coming out. Where does that hope come from? Your guess is as good as mine. Part of his character, I guess. And now we're going to get to the turning point. This is the agon, the conflict, the battle with Mr. Covey. He says, the circumstances leading to the change in Mr. Covey's course toward me from an epoch in my humble history. This is what's going to happen. You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man. That's a nice inversion there. On one of the hottest days of the month, Bill Smith and William Hughes, a slave named Eli, and myself were engaged in fanning wheat. And here, during this activity, Frederick Douglass breaks down. His strength fails him, has this horrible headache, it's dizzy, staggers away, and the work has to stop. And remember, the snake, the guy who's always seeing everything, notices this right away and comes, running up to find out what happened. And then he starts to abuse Frederick Douglass. And he's going to beat him. And here, Frederick says, at this moment, I resolve for the first time to go to my master, enter a complaint, and ask his protection. In order to do this, I must that afternoon walk 7 miles, and he's not in very good shape. And he sort of disappears and runs away back to the master, pleads with him to interpose and protect him. Master Thomas ridicules the idea that Mr. Covey is in danger of killing him, and basically says, you got to go back the next day. You can stay here tonight, but you're going to have to go back. So off he goes back in the morning, walking that 7 miles. And before he could reach me, I succeeded in getting to the cornfield. And Mr. Covey sort of loses him here. And then he spends the day mostly in the woods. And then he'd rather hide there than be, he says, I spent that day mostly in the woods having the alternative before me to go home and be whipped to death or stay in the woods and be starved to death. That night I fell in with Sandy Jenkins. Sandy Jenkins is a slave that he knows. He has a free wife. He lives about 4 miles from Mr. Covey. And Sandy takes him home with him and gives him some advice. And this is a fascinating passage, too. He advises him. He says, you got to go back to Mr. Covey. But then let's go into the woods. And he gives Frederick Douglass a root. He says, which if I would take some of it with me, carrying it always on my right side, would render it impossible for Mr. Covey or any other white man to whip me. So this root seems to be, like a vestige of maybe like the West African religions. Like it's a kind of a talisman or an amulet or something like that has like magic powers. And it's superstitious. But the weird thing is it kind of works. So he says, when he takes the root, he comes back, and when he meets Mr. Covey is actually nice to him. It made me think that there was something in the root which Sandy had given me. Sometimes something like that might give you some confidence, like a placebo effect. I'm not sure. But then the root powers were tested on Monday morning. And this is the battle. Mr. Covey seemed now to think he had me and could do what he pleased, but at this moment, from whence came the spirit, I don't know. I resolved to fight. Sometimes, folks, you need to fight. And he says, suiting my action to the resolution, I seized Covey hard by the throat, and as I did so, I rose. He held on to me, and I to him. My resistance was so entirely unexpected that Covey seemed taken aback. He trembled like a leaf. This gave me assurance, and I held him uneasy, causing the blood to run where I touched him with the ends of my fingers. So they have this knockdown, drag-out battle for something like 2 hours. And you could say, well, I like to think of it as Frederick Douglass beat the crap out of him, but it was sort of fighting to a draw. And here it says we were at it for nearly 2 hours. Covey at length let me go, puffing and blowing at a great rate, saying that if I had not resisted, he would not have whipped me half so much. Yeah, as if. The truth was that he had not whipped me at all. I considered him as getting entirely the worst end of the bargain, for he had drawn no blood from me, but I had from him. He bloodies Mr. Covey. This is fascinating. The whole 6 months afterwards, he never laid the weight of his finger upon me in anger. He was whipped at least once a week for 6 months. And after this battle, where he beats the crap out of Mr. Covey, doesn't lay a finger on him. And here he tells us the battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my career as a slave. The turning point was not learning to read. It wasn't learning to write. It wasn't anything that anyone did for him. It was this moment when a broken slave lifted himself up with his own 2 hands, took on the powerful man and fought him. It rekindled the few expiring embers of freedom and revived within me a sense of my own manhood. It recalled the departed self-confidence and inspired me again with a determination to be free. Maybe that root Sandy Jenkins gave him helped give him some confidence. Maybe this is just something in Frederick Douglass's character that would not be denied. The gratification afforded by the triumph was a full compensation for whatever else might follow, even death itself. He only can understand the deep satisfaction which I experienced, who was himself repelled by force, the bloody arm of slavery. I felt as I never felt before. It was a glorious resurrection. All this biblical language, all shot through the whole narrative. From the tomb of slavery to the heaven of freedom. It's almost like Douglass is a Christ-like figure. My long crushed spirit rose. Cowardice departed. bold defiance took its place, and I now resolved that however long I might remain a slave in form, the day had passed forever when I could be a slave in fact. I did not hesitate to let it be known of me that the white man who expected to succeed in whipping must also succeed in killing me. From this time, I was never again what might be called fairly whipped, though I remained a slave 4 years afterwards. I had several fights, but was never whipped. And you almost feel like before he's officially free, he's now free. He's his own man. He's going to defend himself. He's got the power of self reliance, fortitude, courage, confidence, self confidence. He's not going to let this system break him anymore. And he speculates, like, why was it that Mr. Covey didn't lay a hand on him after that? And he says, the only explanation isn't really satisfying to me, but I'll share it. It was of considerable importance that his reputation was at stake. And had he sent me to the public whipping post, his reputation would have been lost. So to save his reputation, he suffered me to go unpunished. More important for Mr. Covey to save face and not let it be known that this slave had whipped him. So he's just going to lay his hands off. Okay, so that 1 year tenure with Mr. Covey finally ends in Christmas of 1833. And then we have a interesting section here about the Christmas holiday. So the slaves were given about 6 or 7 days off at the holidays, and they could sort of do their own thing. And they would dance, they would drink, they would have games and foot races, and the slave holders sort of expected them to indulge themselves this way. But here's the impact that this had on the slave. This is just really fascinating to me. He says, from what I know of the effect of these holidays upon the slave, I believe them to be among the most effective means in the hands of the slaveholder in keeping down the spirit of insurrection. Why would giving them time off, a holiday, keep them down? These holidays serve as conductors or safety valves to carry off the rebellious spirit of enslaved humanity. But for these, the slave would be forced up into the wildest desperation. And woe betide the slaveholder the day he ventures to remove or hinder the operation of those conductors. And he says here, the holidays are part and parcel of the gross fraud, wrong, and inhumanity of slavery. They are professedly a custom established by the benevolence of the slaveholders, but I undertake to say it's the result of selfishness and one of the grossest frauds committed upon the downtrodden slaves. They do not give the slaves this time because they would not like to have their work during its continuance, but because they know it would be unsafe to deprive them of it. This will be seen by the fact that the slaveholders like to have their slaves spend those days just in such a manner as to make them as glad of their ending as of their beginning. Their object seems to be to disgust the slaves with freedom by plunging them into the lowest depths of dissipation. What does freedom mean? Freedom means you can do what you want to do, right? You are free. But if the way you exercise that freedom is to just dissipate yourself through drinking and carousing, irresponsible behaviors, you're going to get kind of drunk with that and sick of it and waste it. It's like wasting your freedom. How many people have freedom, but they don't know what to do with it? For instance, the slaveholders not only like to see the slave drink of his own accord, but will adopt various plans to make him drunk. They facilitate it. when the slave asks for virtuous freedom, the cunning slaveholder, knowing his ignorance, cheats him with a dose of vicious dissipation. Oh, here's what freedom means. Freedom means just like getting drunk. Artfully labeled with the name of liberty. The most of us who used to drink it down, and the result was just what might be supposed. Many of us were led to think that there was little to choose between liberty and slavery. We felt that we had almost as well be slaves to man as to rum. So when the holidays ended, we staggered up from the filth of our wallowing, took a long breath, and marched to the field, feeling, upon the whole, rather glad to go from what our master had deceived us into a belief was freedom, back to the arms of slavery. Very cunning, very wily, and I think there's a lot of truth in that you can extrapolate to modern times. Okay, now Frederick goes to live with a Mr. William Freeland, who's a much nicer slaveholder, treats him a lot better. And he says, another advantage I gained in my new master was he made no pretensions or professions of religion. So the critique of religious hypocrisy continues. I assert most unhesitatingly that the religion of the South is a mere covering for the most horrid crimes, a justifier of the most appalling barbarity, a sanctifier of the most hateful frauds, and a dark shelter under which the darkest, foulest, grossest, and most infernal deeds of slaveholders find the strongest protection. For all slaveholders with whom I have ever met, religious slaveholders are the worst. And he gives you some examples here. More examples. Mr. Hopkins being the one who gets the most attention here. Okay, and then we move on to sort of a new section in this chapter where we find how Frederick Douglass, remember, he knows how to read and write. So he's going to pass this on, or attempt to pass it on, by teaching Sabbath school and teaching his fellow slaves how to read and write. And this is an aspect of the book I really want to highlight because, this isn't just a story about one individual. We like to think about rugged individuals in American literature. It's part of the American character, the American mythos. But, he needs help and he wants to give help. So he's community building here when he tries to teach these slaves to read and write. And it also leads directly to a sense of solidarity. We were one, and as much so by our tempers and dispositions as by the mutual hardships to which we were necessarily subjected by our conditions as slaves. And it also leads inevitably to a hatching a plan for escape. So if they can collaborate, they can help one another out. So the plan is to sort of, you can read it for yourself here, but it's roughly, we're going to escape by way of the Chesapeake Bay. We're going to get like a canoe and we're going to, we have forged papers, but we're going to kind of like, it's a plan. Like they're going to try to they're going to try to get free. The problem is that someone apparently dimed them out, and the plan is sniffed out, and they get arrested and confronted here, and that's what these pages are all about. So it's the first attempt to become free is aborted, and Frederick Douglass very narrowly evades a worse fate of being sent to Georgia or down deep south to become a slave. But it's an interesting action scene where, he's able to When a scuffle ensues, Frederick Douglass is able to throw the forged papers, in the fireplace, so like the evidence is burned, and he kind of gets away with it. And then, through a twist of fate, one of many twists of fates, Captain Auld, in a sense, rescues him and sends him back to Hugh, back to Baltimore to learn a trade. And he works as with a shipbuilder on Fells Point. And this is also interesting. Like, we're moving into the phase in the book where, like, Frederick Douglass is beginning to earn a wage. Like, the wages all go to the master, but it's like a little small step towards freedom. But it doesn't come without consequences and conflict. And what happens is you get a sense here of, well, we'll look at the passage, but this kind of war between the races, like the resentment. And this, to me, is like stuff that goes on in the working classes, like to this very day. He says, okay, he's kind of working now, and he says he had a hard fight with four of the white apprentices. Why? Why did he get into a fight? The facts in the case are these. Until a very little while after I went there, white and black ship carpenters worked side by side, and no one seemed to see any impropriety in it. All hands seemed to be very well satisfied. Okay, so there's like harmony between the races. Many of the black carpenters were freemen. That complicates it a little bit. Things seemed to be going on very well. All at once, the white carpenters knocked off and said they would not work with free-colored workmen. Their reason for this, as alleged, was that if free-colored carpenters were encouraged, they would soon take the trade into their own hands, and poor white men would be thrown out of employment. So you're pitting these groups against one another. Probably worried that the wages would be suppressed, or that they would lose out on the work because the black carpenters would work for less. And they kind of go on strike. They swearing that they would work no longer unless he would discharge his black carpenters. They put on airs using racial epithets. Oh, they're going to take the country, saying we all ought to be killed. And being encouraged by the journeymen, they commenced making my condition as hard as they could by hectoring me around, sometimes striking me. I, of course, kept the vow I made and struck back, regardless of consequences. While I kept them from combining, I succeeded very well, for I could whip the whole of them, taking them separately. But what they do is they gang up on them and they beat the crap out of Frederick Douglass. And then Frederick goes back to Master Hugh and sort of pleads for help. And they do take pity on him and sort of attend to his wounds. And Master Hugh is very much enraged. He sort of appeals for some justice here, but the answer is nothing can be done unless a white man would come forward and testify. So again, the slave doesn't have any civil rights. He's like invisible in the eyes of the law. Of course, it was impossible to get any white man to volunteer his testimony on my behalf. Right? And Master Hugh then, because he doesn't get any redress for the grievances, refuses to let Frederick go back to Mr. Gardner at the shipyard. He kept me himself. His wife dressed my wound till I was again restored to health. And then he took me into the shipyard of which he was foreman in the employment of Mr. Walter Price. And we get some details about how he earning wages. He's learning to become a caulker, and when he doesn't do that, he does other things. And we'll finish with this point where he says, I've observed this in my experience of slavery, that whenever my condition was improved, instead of it increasing my contentment, it only increased my desire to be free and set me to thinking of plans to gain my freedom. I have found that to make a contented slave, it is necessary to make a thoughtless one. That comes back to your knowledge and ignorance theme. It is as necessary to darken his moral and mental vision, and as far as possible to annihilate the power of reason. No literacy, no knowledge equals ignorance and inability to reason. Critical thinking wastes away. He must be able to detect no inconsistencies in slavery. He must be made to feel that slavery is right, and he can be brought to that only when he ceases to be a man. So there's some resentment now. Frederick Douglass is earning a wage, getting $1.50 per day, but he has to hand it all over to the master. He had the power to compel me to give it up. The right of the grim-visaged pirate upon the high seas is exactly the same. And that leads us on to chapter 11, the last chapter in the book, plus an appendix, where we get to the story of Frederick's escape from Baltimore up to the north to become a free man. That's all for now. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions or comments, write them down below, and we'll see you again next time.